Okay, so we were on this last slide in the previous lecture. Part of the way that positive youth development is going to sort of ensure that they sort of promote the good and prevent the bad is to really move towards a program that's going to help children and adolescents develop their sort of competencies, right? To develop competencies that will really make their lives more meaningful and more productive. And that's really how positive youth developmentalists sort of define programs of work that are really effective. An example of a positive youth development program that focuses on developing competencies in children is the Penn Resilience Program. It's highly structured. Again, if you think about that arithmetic, there's a lot about the environmental resources. It offers school children sort of a way of becoming aware of thought patterns. And one of the things, and we're going to talk about this in the next series of studies, is that they try and modify explanatory styles of the students. And part of what we're going to see, and this is a major theme throughout the class, is that the way that you explain how bad events occurred has a huge impact on sort of how resilient you are and essentially how much you bounce back from different types of negative situations. So the first way we're going to look at that is to talk about a study, the Terman life cycle study, which was begun obviously in the early 20s, as you can see here. Terman recruited over 1,500 young students who were in the public schools. All of them were from California, and all of them were thought to be extremely bright. So all of them had been their IQs to be estimated to be 135 or greater. And essentially they started collecting data on them in 1921, and they just kept collecting data. I think there's only a few, if any of them, are actually still alive today. A couple of interesting things about the Terman study was that the youth in their sort of young adulthood, they were generally healthy and successful. They were sort of hardier and healthier during childhood and young adulthood than sort of the average person. But by middle-aged, even though they were very productive citizens, none of them were really identified as a genius or doing sort of great, incredible work. So, they had sort of all the things going for them in many ways. And again, they were productive, useful citizens, but they weren't necessarily outstanding or distinguishable. So a different track to go down someday, but these types of studies show that there's a lot that goes into sort of being an exceptional person. What is interesting from this is that Chris Peterson and his colleagues took this one question that these students had to answer in 1936: have any disappointments, failures, bereavements, or uncongenial relationships with others exerted a prolonged influence upon you, right? So the students had to answer that question. And then Peterson in 1998 and his colleagues coded the way that they explained these sort of negative events, their explanatory style. They coded them for one of three different types of categories. We'll talk a lot more about this later, but what we really see is that when we're coding an explanatory style, it's really this cognitive variable that really reflects how you explain the causes of bad events. And there's three really sort of bad ways that you can explain a bad event. One is it can be very internal. So you can say that the bad event occurred because of me, or because it's something having to do with myself, as opposed to external events. Stable, whatever caused this event is going to last forever. And global, that this event and ultimately these types of events are going to undermine everything in my life. And this is a graph from that paper that's actually posted online. And what you see is that the probability of death, that's what's occurring here as you go from the left to the right on the x-axis, is much higher for all individuals, though particularly males in this case, for individuals who had a global explanatory style. So for individuals who thought that their negative life events were going to sort of undermine everything, this sort of pessimism, this lack of learned optimism in many ways, actually has an impact on later life because individuals ended up actually having a higher probability of dying at a much earlier age. Other areas within the sort of positive aging area look at some of the impacts on longevity. So Danner and colleagues actually drew this really incredibly interesting study where they look at the mortality risks of nuns over 60 years after they've actually become part of a convent. And what we find is that these nuns were actually at the very beginning of their sisterhood were asked to write a short sketch of their life. This is actually the instructions that they were given in 1930. Write a short sketch of your life. This account should not contain more than 200 or 300 words, should be written on a single sheet of paper, and should include different aspects, place of birth, things of that nature. And what's interesting is that this relatively simple task, these authors took each of those and coded them for the amount of positive emotionality that was in all of those short sketches. Here's one of them. This is actually a sister who, as you can see when you read this, there's nothing overly negative about this, but it has low positive emotionality. I was born on September 26th, 1909, the eldest of 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. My candidate year was spent in the mother house teaching chemistry and second year Latin at Notre Dame Institute. With God's grace, I intend to do my best for our order, for the spread of religion, and for my personal sanctification. Okay? Nothing overly negative about that. Here's sister number 2. This is an example of a high positive emotion reflection. God started my life off well by bestowing upon me a grace, an inestimable value. The past year, which I have spent as a candidate studying at Notre Dame College, has been a very happy one. Now I look forward with eager joy to receiving the holy habits of Our Lady and to a life of union with love divine. And what they actually found was, again, these were coded 60 years later, is that the risk of mortality 60 years later, this is actually really a little bit hard to see, unfortunately, in the slide right here, but those who had high positive emotionality just basically lived longer. That's what all of these studies, all of these analyses show here. Those with low positive emotionality were much more likely to die earlier. Those with high positive emotionality were much more likely to live longer. Finally, we want to talk a little bit about the MacArthur Foundation study. It was a sort of a study on successful aging. It sort of investigated the different types of physical, social, and psychological factors that were really related to health and well-being. And in sum, what they basically find is that there's 3 really important components to successful aging. That is avoiding disease, engaging with life, and maintaining physical and cognitive function. Right. So these 3 successful components, avoiding disease, engaging with life, and maintaining functioning, are really sort of the foundation that you need to sort of age well. A couple of other points I think that are really interesting is that life engagement really had 2 really important specific components, sort of a social support and a productivity component, particularly having social emotional support, really feeling liked and loved, and instrumental support, really being able to call upon and someone when you had a need, and being able to feel that that person was going to be able to provide adequate support. These were both important features of life engagement that were important to successful aging. One little gender difference that I always find to be really interesting here is that men experienced more social support from their spouse, while women experienced more social support from their friends and other relatives, not their spouse, and their children. And you can make of that what you want. Finally, I love this slide because it basically identifies the predictors of healthy aging. Don't smoke, cope well, don't drink too much alcohol, maintain a healthy weight, have a stable marriage, exercise, and be educated. That's the secret to healthy aging.